What would you do if you were sitting across from a man that you knew was a serial killer, and it was your job to ensure that they gave their full and complete confession in order to locate their last and still missing victim? It's hard to fathom, but that is exactly what transpired just 14 years ago when Detective Staff Sergeant James Smith sat down with the then distinguished and decorated Wing Commander of the Canadian Armed Forces, Colonel Russell Williams. From 2007 to 2010, over 82 homes had been burglarized in and around a small Ontario suburb, and the person responsible for those offenses had escalated their criminal activity from theft to assault, and from assault to homicide. But the serial killer responsible for leaving a trail of devastation had left something unintended behind. A series of unambiguous evidence that would give law enforcement the one thing they needed to stop him from hurting anyone else: forensic evidence. And it was what that evidence proved that would allow for Detective James Smith to conduct what is arguably one of the most effective and successful demonstrations of a police interrogation that has ever been caught on camera. This is The Detective versus the Serial Killer, an interrogation masterclass. The Russell Williams Story, Episode 1. It was just after 3 p.m. on Sunday, February the 7th of 2010, when then distinguished officer Colonel Russell Williams walked through the doors of the Ontario Provincial Police offices. Williams had been asked to come to the police department for questioning in connection to a string of serial murders that had been plaguing the city of Ontario, Canada. Walking into the lobby that day, Williams maintained a false sense of confidence, believing that he was only there to help point law enforcement in the direction of his neighbor Larry Jones, a man who at the time had been the primary person of interest for those crimes that remained completely unsolved. Law enforcement had focused all of their available resources in a desperate effort to find the still missing victim, Jessica Lloyd. Lloyd was the latest unfortunate victim in a series of violent crimes that the serial killer had continued to escalate. But just 3 days earlier, the Ontario Provincial Police had set up a checkpoint on Highway 37 near the crime scene of Jessica Lloyd's residence. Russell Williams was just one of several hundred people whose vehicle was stopped that day in order to collect vital information that would go on to become the foundation for how this series of crimes would eventually be solved. But on that Sunday afternoon, Williams was not fully aware of the opponent for whom he was about to face. A detective that was bound and determined to seek justice for all of the victims that had suffered at the hands of a truly predacious and violent deviant, a man who was about to walk into a trap that he would not see coming.
Oh, yeah.
We took every number I had.
Yeah, now they were doing some pretty thorough interviews that night. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I was
All right.
glad to see it.
I'm just going to move your gloves here. That's a little microphone, just to make sure there's nice and clear. As you can see here, everything in this room is videotaped and audio taped.
Check.
You ever been interviewed by the police in a room like this before?
I have never been interviewed like this.
Oh, no? Okay.
No.
Detective James Smith has just been tasked with interviewing Russell Williams, a man who at the time was still a deeply respected commander in the military, and it would be something of an understatement to express how daunting of a task this would be for any detective, let alone one trying to elicit a confession from a serial killer. But from the moment their interaction begins, Detective Smith sets the stage with a kind and respectful discourse. However, he doesn't waste any time after giving his initial pleasantries to immediately inform Williams exactly the circumstance and situation that he finds himself in. He wants him to know that he's being watched and recorded, intentionally switching the roles that Williams had forced upon so many of his victims prior. But before Williams can even register the enormity of what he's just been told, Detective Smith asks him a question. Have you ever been interviewed by the police in a room like this before? This veteran of law enforcement already knew the answer to that question, but he wanted his subject to speak the answer out loud so that the truth of his predicament would become his reality.
All right. Well, again, Russell, I appreciate you coming in. An investigation like this, I mean, I'm sure you can appreciate it's been big news, especially down Belleville way. And, you know, obviously our approach to cases like this is that we don't give up on somebody being alive until we get evidence that they're not. So because of that, we're treating Jessica's case as an emergent situation, obviously. Yeah. So we're fast forwarding things that we might normally take our time with, and that's why we're here on a Sunday afternoon. Sure. So again, I appreciate it. Okay. We're going to do a pretty thorough interview today. Okay. And the reason for that is because the last thing we want is to be calling people back again and again and again. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over a number of things, and I'm going to explain what all those are to you. Okay. I'm a big coffee guy. I don't know if you're a coffee guy or not, but I didn't want to drink in front of you. So
no, I appreciate that.
All right, go ahead.
So much has just happened in the expanse of the last 60 seconds. Detective Smith has very calmly informed Russell that he is there because of the urgent focus of law enforcement to find information concerning the latest victim of this unknown offender who has completely terrorized their city. At this very moment in time, law enforcement was not certain that Jessica Lloyd was in fact deceased. All they knew with certainty was that she fit the pattern of the multitude of victims before her. And despite the urgency of their investigation, Detective Smith adopts a very respectful yet indirect approach to this stage of the interview. He wants Russell to know that the interview will be thorough and exhaustive, but almost immediately after making that statement, he diverts his attention and offers him a cup of coffee. Each and every time that he says something that could potentially push Williams into a defensive posture, Staff Sergeant James Smith expertly follows those statements with a quick alteration in tone that prevents Russell from shutting down and completely stonewalling his investigation. And the best part of all of this is, Detective Smith, he's just warming up.
I have a simple rule when I talk to people. It's I'm sure you're the same way. I treat everybody with respect. I don't want to ask if they do the same for me. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off by going through what your rights are, okay? Just like everybody else, okay? Have you ever been read your rights before?
No.
Yeah, I'm sure you've seen it on TV a whole bunch of times, but that's usually the American version, so I'll go over with you briefly, okay? Basically in Canada, as you know, I'm sure, is we all have our rights guaranteed under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, okay? Now, Russell, just to avoid any confusion, because people do get confused when they're talked to by the police, is that you're obviously not under arrest here today, okay? Anytime you feel you want to leave here, you feel free to do so. The door's not locked. Teresa will walk you down the lobby anytime you want, okay? If there's anything that comes up in our interview today, Russell, that you feel you want to talk to a lawyer about, you just let me know, okay?
Detective Smith is a certified forensic polygraph examiner, and he holds certification as a forensic interviewer as well, eventually being promoted as a detective inspector of the Ontario Provincial Police. And it's because of that experience that we know that he was well versed in the read technique, as well as the myriad of other tools that he had at his disposal as a senior member of law enforcement. But what I find even more interesting than the typical read analysis that so many have already done covering this interrogation is the subtle nuances that are occurring from our vantage point. As we watch this interview unfold, we see Russell nervously fidgeting, incessantly chewing his gum, which seems to mirror his anxiety as he is informed of his legal rights. Detective Smith has been careful to advise him that he is not under arrest and that he is free to leave at any point in this entire interview. And even though he is skillfully using the tools of the read technique as a strategy, it's his words and inflection that are the sharpest tools at his disposal. In this segment, he preemptively disarms Russell's need to feel defensive, providing him a false sense of security by the inference that all of this is a mere formality and that his presence is only needed to help rule him out of their investigation due to the urgency of needing to locate Jessica Lloyd. This officer of the law begins with an opening chess move that withholds the mountain of growing evidence against Williams, appearing to sacrifice the strength of law enforcement's position. But in reality, it's a trap, and Russell Williams has already made the fatal mistake of placing both feet firmly within its grasp.
If there's anything that comes up in our interview today, Russell, that you feel you want to talk to a lawyer about, you just let me know, okay? Sure. And the reason for that is I want to explain to you exactly what's going on here, okay? Jessica Lloyd is one of 4 cases that we're currently investigating, okay? Right. And essentially what's happened is over the past about 4 or 5 months, there have been 4 occurrences that, like I said, that we're looking into. 2 of those occurrences occurred in September of 2009, and very briefly, they were up in the Tweed area. They involved somebody entering 2 different women's houses in the evening hours and committing sexual acts. Okay. In November of 2009, a young lady by the name of Marie-France Como. Was found murdered in her home in Brighton. And we believe that there was a sexual component to that crime as well. And then most recently we have Jessica Lloyd's disappearance. Okay, so essentially when you're looking at those kind of crimes, we're looking at a number of different potential criminal charges. All right, we're looking at issues all the way from the most serious one, which is first-degree murder, kidnapping, sexual assault, break and enter with intent to commit sexual assault, forcible confinement, okay? And so what I want to make sure you understand, and this is what we've been doing with everybody we've been talking to, is that clearly when we find out who's responsible for one or all of those crimes, they could be charged with one or all of those offenses, okay? Whether it's you or whether it's anybody else, right? Absolutely. And that's why it's important that we make sure that people understand what they have to do and what they don't have to do when they're talking to us, okay? So as I said before, any point today you feel the need, you want to speak to a lawyer, you let me know, and we can take you to a room where you can do that in private, okay?
Detective Smith is easily one of the most skilled investigators that I have seen in years of studying interrogation footage. But I want to carefully review exactly what just happened, because this seasoned detective already has evidence that strongly suggests that Russell Williams was responsible for these crimes. However, he wants more than material evidence in order to prove that. And a common misconception concerning forensic evidence is that it alone is sufficient to ensure a conviction. But unfortunately, that isn't always the case, even when the evidence is compelling. But let's listen again to this moment, and this time pay very close attention to Russell Williams' demeanor.
There have been 4 occurrences that, like I said, that we're looking into. 2 of those occurrences occurred in September of 2009, and very briefly, they were up in the Tweed area. They involved somebody entering 2 different women's houses in the evening hours and committing sexual acts. Okay, in November of 2009, a young lady by the name of Marie-France Como. Was found murdered in her home in Brighton. And we believe that there was a sexual component to that crime as well. And then most recently we have Jessica Lloyd's disappearance. Okay.
We are in the first 4 minutes of this interview, and the subject is doing everything he can to display what he believes are the actions of an innocent man. His affirmative responses to the awful description of what has transpired against these victims only helps to further expose his nervousness and, by extension, his culpability. It's the tension in the way that he chews gum. It's the fact that he nods his head in agreement after Detective Smith describes the crimes. In any other situation, his response would immediately be labeled as odd and incongruent with the information he is being told. But we have to remember who is sitting across from Russell Williams, because despite his calm and seemingly gentle approach, this officer of the law is not someone you ever want to be questioning you in connection to a homicide. On April 8, 2009, 8-year-old Tori Stafford was kidnapped and suffered at the hands of the now infamous killer, Terry Lynn McClintock. In the weeks following her abduction, the Ontario Provincial Police was tasked with speaking with McClintock and her accomplice Michael Rafferty concerning their involvement in this vicious crime. While the evidence against the pair was already considerable, what law enforcement needed was a confession. So the OPP brought Detective James Smith in to speak with the accused Terry Lynn McClintock. Over the course of more than 6 hours, Detective Smith would systematically break down every iteration of Terry Lynn's crimes. And due to the overwhelming evidence against McClintock, in tandem with the exceptional work of the OPP and Detective James Smith, Terry Lynn McClintock was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And now, just a few years later, Russell Williams was sitting in that same unfortunate position, and Detective Smith was determined to ensure that the victims of this case would receive the vindication that they so desperately deserved. One of the most challenging elements of creating a video covering the grisly details surrounding the Russell Williams case is the unfortunate reality that more often than not, this content ends up demonetized. And it's precisely because of that reason that I have partnered with an organization that has made this content possible. In 2015, I underwent a major spine surgery after a serious car accident that completely totaled my vehicle. Just days after my surgery, the insurance adjuster called to tell me that they would not be covering the cost of my expensive surgery. Despite the fact that I had provided the insurance company everything that they had asked for, and the fact that the accident wasn't my fault, the adjuster made the decision that my medical bills would not be covered. One of the dark secrets about many insurance companies is that they will go to great lengths to avoid paying you what your case is worth. And I found that out the hard way. After having undergone extensive surgery on my spine, weeks of physical therapy, and recovering from the trauma of my injuries, the insurance company offered me $4,500 for my pain and suffering. At the time, I didn't understand that when you are seriously injured in an accident, your case could be worth millions. So I made the decision to stop fighting the insurance company alone and sought competent legal representation. Exactly the kind of expert representation you can find in Morgan & Morgan. Morgan & Morgan is the largest personal injury firm in the United States. They don't settle for the insurance company's often junk lowball offers. In fact, in just the past few months alone, they have achieved incredible outcomes for their clients. $12 million in Florida, 34 times the highest offer from the insurance company. And in Philadelphia, they achieved a $26 million settlement, a staggering 40 times the highest insurance offer. And easily one of the best parts of working with the competent and experienced lawyers of Morgan & Morgan is the fact that the fee for their services is free unless they win your case. Additionally, working with them can be done online from your phone. There is absolutely no need to visit their offices or schedule any appointments. So if you are ever seriously injured in an accident, remember that your case could be worth millions, and you are only a few clicks away from potentially changing your life. It's incredibly easy to do, and you can start your claim right now by filling out the form shown on your screen in under 2 minutes by visiting forthepeople.com/behindcriminalminds. Again, that's forthepeople.com/behindcriminalminds. Their link is available in the description and the pinned comment. And a special thank you to Morgan & Morgan for sponsoring today's episode.
So as I said before, any point today you feel the need, you want to speak to a lawyer, you let me know, and we can take you to a room where you can do that in private, okay?
Okay.
Do you have your own lawyer?
I have a realty lawyer, but
Okay.
no, I don't have a lawyer.
All right. If at any point you want to make that call and you don't know who to call, we have a phone list of lawyers that are available to give you advice free of charge right over the phone. Okay. So again, if at any point today you want to take advantage of that, you just let me know.
Sure.
Is there any reason you want to call a lawyer now?
Nope.
Okay. A couple other fairly simple and straightforward things that you probably understand, but again, we go over them to make sure everybody's clear, is that you don't have to speak to me today, okay?
The reassurance that Russell did not need to speak with him was something that Detective Smith had already said mere minutes ago. But there is a very specific reason why he's repeating it. And it isn't just because he wants to ensure that everything that comes from this interrogation will hold up in a court of law, but also because he wants to give Russell the false sense of security that he won't be pushed beyond his limits. However, he doesn't just stop with reminding him that he can speak with an attorney at any time. Listen to what he says next.
That is because the law considers me to be what we refer to as a person of authority, okay? Probably similar to what you may be considered to be on the base.
Yeah.
And because of that, I can be compelled to appear before any judge in the country, basically, to account for what takes place here today between you and I, okay?
Sure.
And that's the reason why everything's recorded,
Yeah,
because there can't be any more accurate record than that, right? So.
No, understood.
And the other thing I want to make sure you understand is that, you mentioned a second ago about Miss Como being one of your work associates. So I don't know what's happened since November on the military side of things. But what we want to make people clear on is that if you have been spoken to by any person in authority or any police officer about any of those cases, I don't want what they may have said to you to make you feel influenced or compelled to say anything to me today, okay? Whatever you might have felt influenced or compelled to say to them earlier, you don't have to repeat it to me and you don't have to say anything further, okay?
Okay.
But obviously what you do say, for the third time is being recorded, right? So,
Understood.
This is such an important distinction being made, legally speaking. This experienced detective understands the legal ramifications of this interview becoming the center of any future appeals if he fails to properly notify Russell of his legal rights. He also understands that Russell is a commander in the military and that he deeply values the chain of command. He wants to prevent any scenario where he may have inadvertently been given an order compelling him to speak. He wants to ensure that Russell does not provide any information under duress. Now, to a layperson, the repeated reminders by the detective of his rights may seem excessive or even unwarranted, but the detective's disclaimers serve the interest of justice, and most of all, they ensure that if Russell Williams is ever convicted for any of the crimes that he is now facing, that the warnings given by the detective will guarantee that he will remain in prison for the rest of his life. Detective Smith isn't merely being polite. He's closing the door of this carefully laid trap, and the overconfident subject sitting directly in front of him doesn't have a clue.
And essentially, Russell, in a nutshell, that's what we wanted to talk to you about. Okay, those 4 cases are of concern to us, and you've kind of almost hit the nail on the head about some of our issues that kind of make us want to talk to Russell Williams. Okay, because essentially there's a connection between you and all 4 of those cases. Would you agree? Geographically,
And then I guess
or
I drive past, yes, I would have to say there's a connection, yeah.
Detective Smith has just succeeded in obtaining his first indirect confession. He does so by staging the question, "There's a connection between you and all 4 of the cases. Would you agree?" And he only allows 2 seconds to go by before giving Russell a reasonable explanation for providing an affirmative response by saying that he is geographically connected to the 4 cases. To which Williams agrees, acknowledging that he drives past these victims' homes. But the most important part of this interaction was getting Russell to say yes, urging him to acknowledge both verbally and subconsciously his own complicity, pulling on the string that will help to unravel his caustic web of lies. And whether Russell realizes it or not, he is no longer the predator. He's the prey.
So that particular week, do you have any recollection? Well, for instance, when you got the email,
Yeah.
do you remember where you were?
I was at home in Tweed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you remember if that was a week that you were reasonably stable in Trenton, or had you flown?
No,
over
I
there?
had been in Ottawa. I had been in Ottawa earlier in the week. for some meetings over in Gatineau for one of the, it's actually for the C-17 acquisition. I was project director when I was here in Ottawa for that, so just some follow-up stuff for that.
Okay.
So I had been here at some point in that week. Again, I can't remember how the days all fell together, but I seem to remember that I got this word shortly after having come back from Ottawa. It seems to me it was the same week.
So if we were to do a similar investigation in your background, is there anything you can think of that anybody may have misinterpreted, or anything in your history that somebody might say Russell Williams
Absolutely.
did this?
No.
Okay.
Be very boring.
What's that?
It'll be very boring.
All right.
One of the things that I've learned from speaking with detectives throughout the course of my career is the importance of preventing the subject of the interview from completely shutting down. At this juncture of their conversation, Detective Smith knows that he's dealing with someone who is intelligent, accomplished, and again, at the time, very well respected. Someone who has a lot to lose, especially by admitting to something as grievous as the crimes that he is now implicated in. He understands that keeping him talking, even if that conversation isn't necessarily leading towards an admission of guilt, is the only way that he can keep him from stopping the interview and demanding a lawyer. But it's what Detective Smith asks in this next segment of their conversation that will start a timer on the self-destruction of Russell Williams' lies. Listen closely.
So the next thing we need to cover off is, I'll just ask you this straight out. Given the types of crimes we're investigating, do you get much chance to watch television shows, CSI, things like that?
I do watch, I prefer Law and Order, but I do watch CSI occasionally, yes.
Okay. So you have an idea of, obviously, the forensic capabilities, things like that are out there. What would you be willing to give me today to help me move past you in this investigation?
What do you need?
Well, would you be willing to supply things like fingerprints, blood samples,
Sure.
things like that?
Yeah.
Okay. Footwear impressions?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I think that's what we're gonna ask you to do.
Okay.
All right.
So much has just happened in mere fractions of a second. Detective Smith has asked Russell for permission to obtain his DNA, to which he quickly but nervously agrees to comply. But it's immediately after that question about his DNA that he is asked for footwear impressions. Let's rewatch that moment again so that you can see just how different his response is to that specific question.
Would you be willing to supply things like fingerprints, blood samples,
Sure.
things like that?
Yeah.
Okay. Footwear impressions?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Russell Williams is a cold, sadistic, and violent criminal, but like most sociopaths, he's not ignorant. He understands that a question as specific as his footwear is by design, and that the only imaginable and likely reason that law enforcement would want impressions of his footwear is because he must have left some evidence behind. 10 days earlier, on the evening of the 28th of January, Jessica Lloyd sent a final text message to a friend at 10:36 p.m. Around that same time, a Nissan Pathfinder parked in the field adjacent to Jessica's home, and the man inside of that vehicle watched and stalked Jessica while she got ready for bed. But even before he committed his crimes that night, both his vehicle and his shoes had left unmistakable impressions behind in the snow of Jessica Lloyd's backyard. And it was those impressions that were about to spring the trap that Russell Williams was already standing in.
Can I assume you're going to be discreet?
It's possible. Yeah.
Because, this would have a very significant impact on the base if they thought you thought I did this.
Well, bottom line, Russell, that's one of the reasons we're here on a Sunday afternoon.
Okay.
The military certainly be of great assistance to us, especially in relation to Miss Como's investigation.
Mm-hmm.
So that's certainly one of the things that went into our decision to give you a call at home today and see if we could deal with this today.
Okay.
So, okay.
At this stage of the interview, Detective Smith has stepped out to allow for other agents to come in and collect buccal swabs for Russell Williams' DNA. But when Detective Smith returns, one of the very first things that Russell asks for is discretion. He's deeply concerned about the possibility of being implicated in this crime and being unable to manage those rumors. Russell Williams may have been regarded as an intelligent man, but he seemed to lack common sense. Law enforcement would not be asking for his DNA unless they had something to compare it to. And the look on his face that we are seeing right now is that of a man who already knows exactly what he's just done. It's the realization that he has just given them the smoking gun linking him to these crimes, and yet he is so delusional that he is still worried about rumors. But while Detective Smith plots his next move, the reality was that from the moment Russell Williams sat in that seat to conduct this interview, he was playing a game that he had already lost. He just didn't know it yet.
Now that you've had some time to, I know we've been throwing a lot of things at you here, but now you've had some time to think about things. Is there anything that you're concerned about that buccal swab matching in any of those 4 residences? Is there, I guess, let me explain what I'm getting at here, Russell, okay? This is a significant investigation, as you can well imagine.
Yeah.
That DNA is going to be significant in our investigation, both quite possibly to help you, quite possibly to help us.
Understood.
I don't know yet. I don't know what the result is yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll go back to the example I gave you because it's a very similar issue, I think. And you talked about the idea of discretion here. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about the idea that I think hopefully you appreciate the fact of how we approached you here.
Yeah, absolutely.
And essentially, we have no issues with that. Okay, we talked recently about the whole idea of any unusual sex acts in your history.
Mm-hmm.
But another thing that can often happen in cases like this is that people become concerned about things like extramarital affairs, indiscretions along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any contact that you may have had with any of those 4 women that you may not want your wife to be aware of, anything like that that we should know about to try and explain why, if your DNA is found, it would help us understand why it may be there?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Did you just see that? When the detective asks him the most poignant question to this point of the interview, Russell responds with an obviously uncomfortable laugh and a clear denial that his DNA will be anywhere on any of the 4 victims involved in this case. In tandem with his skill as an interrogator and his years of experience, Detective Smith is trying to give Russell the opportunity to provide a reasonable excuse, to allow him the opportunity to provide an explanation for why his DNA is going to test positive in every one of those victims' homes. But as we can see, Russell Williams has not yet accepted his fate. He doesn't seem to understand just how far the science of forensic DNA has advanced, and he wrongly believes that he has succeeded in avoiding leaving any incriminating evidence behind. But what you're about to see is the death of that belief, unfolding before your eyes in real time.
Are you familiar with how DNA works?
I think broadly, yes, I would guess so.
One of the challenges we have in 2010 with DNA is it's become so precise that I guess the best way to explain it is I can think back to 15 years ago when I started in violent crime investigation.
Yeah.
For us to get a DNA match, the sample we had to find was, probably would have filled half of one of these cups. Because they destroy so much of the sample in the testing.
Okay.
Essentially, DNA has become more and more precise to the point where when you and I walked in this room earlier today, we could have sat down, talked for 30 seconds, walked out. CSI officer could have come in 3-4 days from now, did some swabs here, and he would have found your DNA and my DNA, and probably a lot of other people's DNA.
Sure.
a little bit gross to think about, but essentially, as we talk, we, a little bit aspirate comes out of our mouth that contains our DNA, our bloods, or our skin cells contain our DNA, and that's what I'm getting at. If you were ever in Laurie's residence, quite possibly, quite innocently, your DNA could be in that residence. Has there ever been a time you've been in there?
No.
Okay.
This veteran detective has just taken the opportunity to completely strip away whatever ignorance that Russell Williams may still have had prior to his arrival concerning the matter of DNA. In doing so, he has laid the foundation for Russell that whatever attempts he may have made to prevent his DNA from being left behind, they were all in vain. But the evidence that he is about to present will fundamentally alter the course of this interaction from a courteous and friendly dialogue to the moment that Russell Williams has been dreading. A calculated series of moves on the part of law enforcement that will force Williams into the realization that he can no longer run from the truth.
What kind of tires do you have on your Pathfinder?
I think they're Toyo.
Okay. Do you know the brand name, or
I think that
make?
is I don't remember. Sorry, the make is Toyo.
Yeah.
I don't know the model.
Okay. Just see, I'll read this off to you, see if it rings a bell. Ever heard of, does Toyo Open Country HTS
That sounds
make any
right.
sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Russell Williams has just confirmed something that, for all intents and purposes, has tightened the noose that he volunteered to place around his own neck. He could not have imagined that something as unassuming as tires would serve to be his undoing. Toyo Open Country HTS tires, seemingly nothing more than a lowly pawn in the game that they were already waging. An ostensibly insignificant piece on the board that any onlooker might be tempted to think was unimportant or inconsequential. But despite the implausibility of a pawn effectively eliminating any defense Williams had left, it was all this detective needed to back Williams into a corner and to begin the slow and methodical process of forcing him to understand something that he could not have imagined. That whether he wanted to accept it or not, this was a fight that he could not win.
The tires that you have on your truck, right? The reason I asked you about that is there any time, you recall where you were stopped by the officers there?
Yes.
Okay. Did they explain to you what the significance
Said
of
that
the
was
location
her house.
That was her house.
Yeah.
Okay. So you remember that location?
Yep.
Do you remember what the crossroad was, or?
I don't think there's a crossroad. It's sort of just on the south end of 37.
Okay. When you get stopped at that location, has there been a time in the recent 1 or 2 weeks that your vehicle has left that road for any reason whatsoever? Have you driven into a field with your vehicle at all? For any reason you can think of?
No.
Okay. Because I want you to rack your brain here. This is important. So,
Yeah.
is there anything you can remember doing that would have caused you to drive off the road
No.
at that section of roadway?
No. That's that's the early part of the highway, and just head north. It's about 30 minutes from there to, probably 20 from there to my house.
Okay.
Russell Williams has spent the last 3 years of his life absolutely terrorizing the people in his neighborhood and community. He had broken into over 80 homes in and around the Ontario area, robbing people of their peace of mind, stealing their property, and progressively increasing his violent acts to the point that these victims and their families now have to spend the rest of their life being associated with this man's appalling actions. But what you are watching right now is Russell Williams beginning to understand that his empire of lies and destruction is crumbling down around him. And despite his seemingly calm demeanor, I assure you, he's panicked. His closed-off body language is evidence of his defensive posture as he desperately tries to obtain as much information as possible so he can determine how or where to pivot. He walked in the door that day thinking that his neighbor was the primary suspect, but at this moment what we see is the death of that certainty and the realization that he no longer has any more power, and that for the first time in his entire life, he's the one who's trapped. And Detective James Smith is finally ready to show him the depths of the trap he's laid.
Would it surprise you to know that when the CSI officers were looking around her property, that they identified a set of tire tracks to the north of her property? Looks as if the vehicle left the road and drove along the north tree line of Jessica Lloyd's property. Okay. They took, they examined those tire tracks. And they have contacts in the tire business. Obviously, tire tracks are a major source of evidence for us.
Sure.
Shortly after this investigation started, they identified those tires as the same tires on your Pathfinder.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
This is the single most important segment of this entire interview. If Detective Smith goes too hard at Russell, he runs the risk of having him completely shut down and refuse to talk any further. And if that were to happen, it would virtually guarantee that they would not be able to locate Jessica Lloyd. But the evidence that he was just provided is completely damning, and Russell knows that. But based on his response to that evidence, it's still clear that he's not ready to confirm anything yet. So the masterclass continues, and Detective Smith sets out on a course to help Russell understand the contours of his predicament, which has just gone from bad to worse.
One of the other things that they do to try and identify the type of vehicle that may have left those tires, well, is they do two things. They talk to witnesses. Okay. There was a female police officer that actually drove by that location that evening and recalls seeing an SUV type vehicle in the field to the north of Jessica Lloyd's house, consistent with a Pathfinder.
Okay.
Could maybe consistent with other things, but consistent with a Pathfinder. And they, what they also do to try and identify the type of the vehicle is they look at what they call the wheelbase width. Okay, because different vehicles, different makes, models have wheelbase width, so they can take those two sets of tire tracks, measure the distance between them. Okay, and determine what the width is.
Sure.
And then they can enter that into a vehicle database, and it will spit out the types of vehicles. Okay, your Pathfinder's wheelbase width is very, very close to the width of the tires that were left in that field. Okay. Do you have any recollection at all of being off that road?
I was not off the road, no.
Okay.
The facts that Detective Smith has just outlined are completely unimpeachable. He has plainly explained that the tires on Russell's vehicle are not only the correct make and model, but they are also the same spacing that is an identical match to his vehicle. He again gives him the opportunity to explain why his tires would be in the backyard of Jessica Lloyd's house. But again, Williams feigns ignorance. But it's this next interaction that sets the stage for the climax of this entire case. And it's something that even Russell Williams would not see coming.
Russell, is there anything you can think of? Let's go talk about Marie-France Como for a minute, okay? Is there any reason at all you can think of that during our investigation, obviously we're searching computers, things like Blackberries, right? Electronic devices, looking through houses for things that are in handwriting, written notes, diaries, things like that. Now, I'm not at liberty to tell you what the content was, but is there any reason at all you can think of why Marie-France Como would have specifically referenced you in some of her writings?
Not at all.
No?
No, absolutely not.
Okay. Is there anything that she ever said to you that led you to believe that there might be something more than a passing interest with her towards you?
Not at all. No, we spent, one flight together talking. I'd go back occasionally and talk. No, if that's the case, that's very surprising.
Okay. All right. You have any questions for me right now?
No.
Okay. I'm just going to step out and see how things are going, okay? I mean, it is a Sunday, but there's probably 60, 70 people working on this file, so there's a lot of things happening.
Sure.
So let me go out and see what's happening, and then I'll come back in and we'll hopefully continue.
Detective James Smith has just told Russell Williams a well-placed lie. Over the years, evidence has come out that Marie Franscomo did not write anything about Williams in her diary. But this masterful ruse was about to have a profound effect in the mind of this predacious killer. Detective Smith wanted to leave Williams with the fear that his former victim has revealed something about him that would serve to expose his true identity even further. And at the worst possible moment, when his uncertainty could not be any higher, Detective Smith leaves to take a 10-minute break to put him on ice. And by doing so, he forces Williams to sit with the knowledge that law enforcement knows something about him that he doesn't know or can't control, and that whatever was in that diary may have the power to expose the full extent of his predatory predilections. But when Detective Smith returns, everything in Russell Williams' life will be exposed. His entire facade will be wiped away, and the curtain hiding the truth of the monster he truly is will finally fall.
I told you when I came in here that I'm going to treat you with respect, and I've asked you to do the same for me. We talked about the whole idea of how we've approached you here, okay? The trying to be as discreet as possible, okay? But the problem is, Russell, is every time I walk out of this room, there's another issue that comes up, okay? And it's not issues that point away from you, it's issues that point at you, okay? And I want you to see what I mean, all right? This is the footwear impression of the person who approached the rear of Jessica Lloyd's house on the evening of the 28th and 29th of January, okay? All right? Now, I want you to keep in mind that this is slightly smaller, okay, in scale, okay?
Okay.
All right, that's not to scale. That's the footwear is actually bigger.
Okay.
If you look here on the ruler, you'll see that 1 inch is just slightly smaller than an actual inch, okay? But this is the way it prints off on the computer.
Yeah.
I'm going to move this over so you can see what I mean, all right? Because essentially when you're dealing with footwear impressions, we have a gentleman on the OPP who's basically world-renowned. His name is John Norman. And essentially with footwear impressions, you're in a situation where you're pretty much in the area of fingerprints, okay? And essentially what we're talking about here is, especially when you start adding in other pieces of information that support an investigative position, okay? This is a photocopy of the boot that you took off your foot just a little while ago, okay? Now, I'm not an expert in footwear impressions, so I rely on the experts. Footwear impressions are very much like fingerprint comparisons, okay? You take a look at this print, and again, this is one print. This person walked through, there's several different prints to compare, so we're going to get features off of one print to compare, features off another print to compare. These are identical.
That was it. That was the moment when Russell Williams gave law enforcement the verification that he was responsible for this crime. He has just been shown evidence linking his shoes and his tires to the crime scene, and he doesn't have anything to say about it? Let's really think about it. If Russell Williams was truly innocent, wouldn't he deny having anything to do with this crime? Everything about what you just saw is a stunning expose of calculated skill and a mastery of police work. Detective Smith has Russell Williams dead to rights. This man had the audacity to walk into this interview with the exact same shoes that he wore on the night that he committed a truly vile crime against Jessica Lloyd. And now law enforcement has shown him side-by-side pictures of the shoes that were on his feet and the same shoes found at the crime scene. But we have to understand this situation in the context of this moment in time. Russell Williams has been sitting in that seat for just over an hour. He still mistakenly believes that he might be able to explain or disprove their evidence, and he's negotiating his options in his mind. And as usual, Detective James Smith is going to use his precision tools to remove those final objections in this serial killer's mind, leaving only one viable option: to confess.
Your vehicle drove up the side of Jessica Lloyd's house. Your boots walked to the back of Jessica Lloyd's house on the evening of the 28th and 29th of January. Okay, you want discretion. We need to have some honesty, okay? Because this is getting out of control really fast, Russell. Okay, really, really fast.
One of the most important tools that Detective Smith deploys at this stage of the interview is something that most people never think to use when staging a confrontation: silence. As the detective systematically eliminates any reasonable explanation for why Russell's shoes, his vehicle, and not far from now, his DNA is present in the homes of each victim, he gives him something that is far more powerful than even the evidence that demonstrably proves his guilt: complete and utter silence.
This is getting beyond my control. All right, I came in here a few hours ago and I called you the way I called you today because I wanted to give you the benefit of the doubt.
Mm-hmm.
But you and I both know you were at Jessica Lloyd's house, and I need to know why.
I don't know what to say.
This is the very first time that Russell Williams has been given a direct accusation linking him and the evidence to the crimes that he's committed. And as we can see, Williams is desperately looking through the evidence, trying to find any way to explain how or why their proof isn't as ironclad as he already knows that it is. In fact, in the days preceding this interview, Russell Williams had done something truly monstrous in an effort to avoid detection. As we have already learned, Williams was aware that his neighbor Larry Jones had already been interviewed by law enforcement and was an early person of interest in the serial crimes that he was responsible for. Williams took it upon himself to ask Larry where he regularly went hunting. And then Russell went out of his way to dispose of the remains of one of his victims in that location in an effort to frame Larry for his crimes. And I imagine it's why his panic and fear is so loud despite his failure to utter a sound, because he is coming to the realization that all of his lies will do nothing to save him. But this experienced forensic investigator understood that he would need to continue to push Williams into a corner, if for no other reason, so that he could finally accept his fate, so that he could finally accept the reality that the only way out of this was to tell the truth.
I don't know what to say. It's,
Well, you need to explain it, because this is the other problem we're having, Russell, okay? Again, these decisions are made by me. Right now, there's a search warrant being executed at your residence in Ottawa. Okay? So your wife now knows what's going on. There's a search warrant being executed at your residence in Tweed, and your vehicle's been seized. Okay? You and I both know they're going to find evidence that links you to these situations. Okay? You and I both know that the unknown offender, male, on Marie France Comeau's body is going to be matched to you, quite possibly before the evening's over. Okay? This is a major investigation. The Center of Forensic Science is on call 24 hours a day helping us with this. Your opportunity to take some control here and to have some explanation that anybody is going to believe is quickly expiring. Okay? We're applying, the investigators now applying for a warrant to search your office. All right, these aren't decisions that we can say yes or no to. This is the practical steps in an investigation like this. And Russell,
Williams was just caught attempting to dissociate from this onslaught of information that he can no longer hide from. And Detective Smith has just told him something that will form the basis for why Russell Williams will finally break. And surprisingly, it's not his tires, it's not his shoe prints, or the DNA evidence that confirms his culpability. It's the one thing that will break the dam and force out the truth, something that will go on to form the basis of a lawsuit against the one person that Russell Williams cares more about than his victims or even himself. It's his wife.
Russell, listen to me for a second, okay? When that evidence comes in, when that DNA match, when that phone rings and somebody knocks on this door, your credibility is gone, okay? Because this is how credibility works, all right? And I know you're an intelligent person and you probably don't need to hear this explanation, but I also know your mind's racing right now, okay? Because I've sat across a lot of people in your position over the years, okay? The bottom line is that as soon as we get that piece of evidence that solidifies it, DNA, okay? As soon as the expert in footwear impressions, the expert in tire impressions calls and says, yes, I've examined those and they're a match, it's all over. Because as soon as that happens, where's your credibility? Where's your believability? You're just another, and again, don't take this wrong, okay? But you can see if you step outside this room in your mind and imagine how people are going to view you, okay? If the truth comes out after the clear evidence is presented to you, when you finally go, okay, I'm screwed now.
Homicide detectives are trained in a variety of tactics to reason with an offender, to apply pressure in different ways, and if needed, to appeal to their twisted sense of morality. Right now, Russell is being encouraged to not allow himself to be viewed by the general public as an inhuman monster who, when given the opportunity to take accountability, shrugged it off and remained cold and apathetic to the plight of his victims' families. Detective Smith could not have known, but right now there is something deeply bothering Russell Williams, even more than all of the evidence that is now stacked against him. And if James Smith, the person, not the detective, can be patient long enough, he's about to see the first crack in a wall that this serial killer has been hiding behind his entire life. Right now, all he needs to do is to be patient.
What are we going to do? Russell, you know there's only one option. What other option is there?
What's the option?
Well, I don't think you want the cold-blooded psychopath option. I might be wrong. Okay, because don't get me wrong, I've met guys who actually kind of enjoyed the notoriety, got off on it, got off on having that label. Bernardo being one of them. I don't see that in you. If I saw that in you, I wouldn't be back in here talking to you, quite frankly.
The name Paul Bernardo was just invoked by Detective Smith. Bernardo was an infamous serial rapist who was reviled by everyone when the full length and breadth of his crimes were revealed to the public. Detective Smith is appealing to Williams' sense of duty, hoping that it still remains in light of his military service. He does this by encouraging him to make a distinction between himself and a literal monster. Making this distinction despite knowing that there is no difference between either man. He simply wants him to believe that there is. And every moment of what we have just watched has been a calculated and deliberate plan by Detective Smith to systematically push Russell Williams to the point of no return. To the moment where he fully understands the reality that he now occupies. That there are no more places to hide, no more roads on which he can run, and that everything he has done to hide his proclivity to destroy and maim the lives of good and innocent people, this veteran of law enforcement has completely torn down all of those defenses and forced the man who was once known as Colonel Russell Williams into the one place he could not have imagined he would be forced to go. To the place where the only thing left to do was to tell the truth, to tell them where they could find Jessica Lloyd, and most importantly, to give his full and complete confession. But before we can understand the importance of the rest of this interview, we need to understand the weight of what was at stake. We need to see the world through the eyes of the people who suffered at the hands of this sociopath, who masterfully cosplayed a respectful and decent man. Because in order for us to understand and realize just how important this moment was, we need to go back to the beginning. As part of my commitment to working on and producing content at a faster pace, I have realized that I will need to be creative in how I accomplish that goal, which is why the next chapter of The Detective versus the Serial Killer will be a week from now. I realize that my storytelling is quite a bit different than what most people may be used to, so I am thankful that I have earned the gift of your time. And it's why I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to comment, to engage, and especially those of you that share the video. Those seemingly insignificant things go such a long way for this channel, and I especially want to thank those of you who have subscribed to the channel. The reason why this channel continues to be successful is only because you make that possible. So thank you for engaging the way that you do. I have never known a more kind, gracious, and lovable group of people, and I am forever grateful to have you in this community. To each and every Patreon and YouTube channel supporter, I want to take a moment to tell you how much you are appreciated. Since the inception of this channel, your support has allowed me to work on projects that have taken a considerable amount of time. But it's because of your support that more people are able to hear this very different take on the true crime genre. And even if I say it often and excessively, I will never miss an opportunity to tell you how much your support means to me. And this is not something that I say because I have to or because I think that it's what I should do. I say these things because I want you to know that your support means the world to me. I also want to take a moment to thank Annie, who helped immensely with the research of this case, investing probably over 100 hours into what will become this whole series. You are truly exceptional at what you do, Annie, and I want to thank you for that. I am so grateful to have you on this team. And to our producers, thank each of you for going the extra mile and for extending your vote of confidence in such a profound way. It's truly an honor to work with and beside such an incredible community of people. I simply cannot wait to share all of the new cases that I'm working on with each of you. you can continue to expect regular bi-weekly content for the foreseeable future, or at least until I become completely obsessed with another case, which I promise I won't do for a while. I need to get away from that for a bit, okay? I promise. But again, thank you for being here, for your support, and for being a part of this amazing community. It's truly an honor to create content for people that I respect and love. So thank you for making this possible. And as always, this has been Behind Criminal Minds. We'll see you next time.